There is a bin near the front of almost every grocery store in summer, piled high with fruit that all looks the same. 200 melons or oranges or pineapples stacked under the same light, wearing the same color, cut to the same size by the same distant machine. You pick one up. You turn it over in your hands, and if you are honest, you have no idea what you are looking for. So you do what most people do. You choose the one that looks biggest or brightest or simply closest. You carry it home, and 2 days later, at the kitchen table, you find out the truth. The flesh is pale where it should be deep. The juice is thin. The first bite is watery or sour or tastes of almost nothing at all. Half of it goes into the bin. And quietly, without quite saying it aloud, you decide that picking good fruit is a matter of luck. It is not. It never was. Because the fruit in that bin is not identical. No matter how it looks, each one carries a record of how it grew, how much sun fell on it, how often the bees visited its flower, how long it stayed on the vine, and the exact moment it was cut away. That record is written on the outside of the fruit, in color and shape and weight and scent. For most of human history, ordinary people could read it. They could walk up to a pile of melons at a roadside stand and choose the sweetest one in the heap, every single time, before they paid a cent. They were not guessing. They were reading. That skill has nearly vanished, and the reason it vanished is the quiet heart of this story. It did not disappear because it stopped working. The signals are still there. A ripe melon still keeps the same golden mark on its belly that it kept 100 years ago. The reason the reading faded is that the system around the fruit changed. The modern supply chain was built to move produce thousands of miles and stack it in uniform bins. And it learned to reward fruit that looked the same, shipped well, and survived the journey. It never learned to reward fruit that told you the truth about its own ripeness. A melon picked too early and a melon picked at its peak can sit side by side in the same bin, the same price, the same shape, the same shine. The system optimized for the look. And once the look was all that mattered, the skill of reading the fruit had nothing left to hold on to. So it stopped being passed down. This is what we are going to recover. Over the next 2 hours, we will move through the produce aisle the slow way, the old way, one fruit at a time. We will start with the watermelon, whose rind keeps a diary of its entire life on the vine. We will move to the cantaloupe and the small moment when the plant itself decides to let the fruit go. We will reach the pineapple, the one fruit that offers no second chance, because what it is when you buy it is what it will always be. We will learn why the color of an orange can lie to your face, and how to find the truth underneath it. We will see why the smallest, plainest strawberry in the basket is often the sweetest. And we will end with the avocado, the one fruit that breaks every rule the others taught us, and in breaking them, explains them. None of these tests are hard. None of them cost anything. By the end, you will never stand helpless in front of a bin again. But before any of that, it helps to understand that this knowledge was once completely ordinary, and to see exactly where it went. There was a time, not very long ago, when choosing fruit was a skill a child absorbed the way they absorbed the alphabet. It happened at the roadside stand and the open-air market, where the fruit came from a farm you could probably see from the road, picked that morning or the morning before. The seller knew which field each melon came from. The buyer knew what a ripe one smelled like. And the lessons passed from one pair of hands to another without anyone writing them down. A grandmother turning a melon over to show a granddaughter the color of its belly. A mother pressing a daughter's thumb against the end of a cantaloupe so she would feel the give for herself. In the early decades of the 20th century, this kind of household food knowledge was even taught formally. Agricultural colleges and home economics programs printed bulletins explaining how to judge ripeness, how to store the harvest, how to read the signs that a fruit was ready. The selecting of good produce was treated as a practical literacy, as necessary as knowing how to mend a coat or salt a cut of meat. It assumed something we have since lost, that the person buying the fruit and the person who grew it understood the same language. Then the distance between them grew. The change came with the supermarket, and with the machinery that made the supermarket possible. In the middle of the 20th century, the self-service store replaced the counter where a grocer once handed you your produce by hand. Now the fruit sat in open bins, and you served yourself. At the same time, the refrigerated truck and the refrigerated rail car, the long cold chain that still feeds us today, made it possible to grow fruit in one climate and sell it 2,000 miles away in another. A melon could be grown in a desert in winter and eaten in a northern city a week later. That was an extraordinary achievement. But it quietly rewrote the rules of the fruit itself. To survive the journey, fruit had to be picked before it was soft, before it was fragile, before it was fully ready. It had to be firm enough to be stacked, sorted, and shipped without bruising. And to sell in a self-service bin, it had to look appealing from across the aisle, even, bright, unblemished, and above all, uniform. The qualities the system rewarded were durability, shelf life, and appearance. Sweetness and ripeness, the things you only discover after you cut the fruit open, were no longer what the chain was built to protect. So fruit was increasingly bred and graded for the truck, not for the table. And the old signals, the golden belly, the dried vine, the heavy weight, the deep scent, were still there on the good ones, but they were no longer the reason a fruit ended up in the bin. The bin was sorted by size and color. The reading skill, which had survived for centuries because every market demanded it, suddenly had no market that demanded it at all, and so it faded, the way unused knowledge always fades. Not erased, not forbidden, simply no longer needed by the system that fed us, and therefore no longer passed from one hand to the next. A whole country slowly forgot how to read a fruit it had been reading for generations. But the writing never left the fruit. The sun and the vine and the bees are still signing their work on every melon and every orange in that bin. The signals are exactly where they have always been. All that was ever lost was the reading. And reading is a thing you can learn again. We begin where the summer begins, with the watermelon, because no other fruit wears its whole life so openly on the outside. By the second week of July, the bins are heavy with them, round ones and long ones, some pale and striped, some so dark they look almost black under the store lights. They are stacked together as if they were interchangeable, and to most people they are. You lift one, feel its weight, turn it in your hands and set it back down, because nothing about it tells you anything you know how to read. You choose the largest or the one nearest your hand, and you carry it home hoping the inside will match the promise of the outside. Often it does not. The flesh comes out pale instead of deep red, the white rind too thick, the seeds still pale when they should be dark, and the first bite is watery and almost without taste. The disappointment feels random, as though the fruit had simply drawn a bad number somewhere in a field you never saw. But there was nothing random about it. That melon had been telling you exactly what it was the entire time it sat in the bin. The reason you couldn't hear it is that almost no one is taught the language anymore. A watermelon is, in a sense, a slow recording device. From the moment its flower is pollinated to the moment it is cut from the vine, it registers everything that happens to it. How often the bees came, how much sun fell across its surface, how long it lay against the warm ground, and whether the plant was still feeding it or had already begun to let it go. All of that is inscribed on the rind in marks that do not lie, because they are not decoration. They are the physical consequences of how the fruit grew. The old farm households read those marks the way a sailor reads the sky, not as a trick, but as ordinary literacy, and the first mark they read was the one most shoppers never even turn the melon over to find. That mark is the field spot, the pale patch on the underside where the melon rested against the earth. It is the single most honest signal on the entire fruit, and it forms for a simple physical reason. As the melon grows, one part of it lies flat against the soil, shielded from the sun and from the movement of air. No light reaches that patch, so no green develops there, and instead it slowly changes color as the fruit ripens against the warmth of the ground. The longer the melon stays on the vine, soaking up that warmth, the deeper and richer that hidden patch becomes. On a melon left to ripen fully, The field spot turns a creamy, buttery, deep yellow, the color of fresh cream or soft butter. That color is the fruit's own signature, confirming it stayed on the plant long enough to finish. When the field spot is pale, white, or barely tinted, it is telling you the opposite story. That melon was cut from the vine before the sun and the warm earth had finished their slow work. And no amount of waiting on your kitchen counter will repair it, because a watermelon does not grow any sweeter once it has been picked. Whatever sugar it carried out of the field is all the sugar it will ever have. A melon with almost no field spot at all, still green on its underside, was taken so early it never even settled into a resting place against the ground, and it will be watery and flat no matter how perfect it looks from above. Farmers who walk their own fields lean on this signal above all others. If the bellies of the melons at a stand are all pale, the people who actually grow the fruit simply move on. And so should you. A deep, buttery field spot tells you more about what waits inside than the size, the shine, or the price ever could. The second signal sits at the opposite end of the fruit where the melon was joined to the plant, and it reveals a different thing entirely. The field spot tells you how long the melon ripened. The stem tells you who decided it was finished, the plant or the person with the knife. Beside the small stem on the rind, there is often a curl of dried vine, the little tendril that grew next to the melon while it developed. When a watermelon reaches true ripeness, the plant itself stops feeding it. The vine withdraws its sap. The connection dries out, and the tendril beside it shrivels and turns brown. The fruit is, in effect, signaling that it is ready to let go, and a melon harvested at that moment carries a brown, dried stem and a brown, withered tendril beside it. A green stem tells the reverse story. It means the vine was still actively feeding the fruit when it was cut, that the plant had not yet finished its work, and that the melon left the field on someone else's schedule rather than its own. Green stem, green tendril, the fruit was taken too soon. This is a signal you can rarely read in a supermarket, where the stems are trimmed short and the tendrils are long gone by the time the fruit reaches the bin. But at a roadside stand or a farmer's market where the melon arrives much as it left the field, the dried tendril is one of the surest things you can look for. Brown means the plant released the fruit on its own. Green means it was released for it. These first two signals already reshape the way you stand in front of a bin, because together they answer the two questions that matter most before any other test. Did this melon ripen long enough? And did it ripen all the way to the moment the plant chose to let it go? Everything else you can learn about a watermelon refines that judgment rather than replacing it. The give of the rind under your thumb, the sound it makes when you tap it, the weight of it in your hands, the symmetry of its shape, and the faint markings threaded across its surface. Each adds another layer of confidence. We will come to all of them. But it is worth pausing on how much is already written on a single melon, and how completely that writing was once understood by people who never thought of it as knowledge at all. It was simply how you bought fruit. What changed was not the fruit and not the marks it carries. The field spot still forms exactly as it always has, and the vine still releases a ripe melon the way it always did. What changed is everything that happens between the field and the bin. A watermelon bound for a distant store is often cut before it is fully soft, so that it can survive stacking, sorting, and days of travel without splitting or bruising. It is graded by the things a machine and a buyer can judge quickly: its size, its shape, the evenness of its color from above, and almost never by the buttery patch hidden against its belly. Two melons can sit side by side in the same bin at the same price. One picked at its peak and one picked a week too soon, and from above they look identical. The system that brought them there was never designed to tell them apart, because telling them apart was never what the system was paid to do. So the marks remained, but the reading of them quietly fell out of use, the way any skill fades when nothing around it requires the skill anymore. The grandmother who turned a melon over to show a child the color of its belly was passing on something the market still demanded of her. When the market stopped demanding it, the lesson stopped being passed down. And within a generation or two, an entire country found itself standing in front of the summer bins, tapping melons in imitation of a gesture it no longer understood. The good news hidden inside that loss is that nothing was actually destroyed. The fruit never stopped writing. We only stopped reading. And reading, unlike the harvest, is something you can pick up again in an afternoon. The field spot and the dried vine tell you the melon's history, how long it ripened, and whether the plant released it willingly. The next signals tell you its present condition, what the fruit is like at the moment it sits in your hands, and the first of these is the simplest. You press the rind gently with your thumb. Not hard, just enough to ask the fruit a question, and you feel how it answers. A watermelon at its peak gives the faintest amount under that pressure, a small spring beneath the surface, the same slight yield you feel in the neck of a ripe pear. It is full of water and dissolved sugar, and that fullness has a quiet life to it that you can feel through the skin. A melon that does not give at all, that meets your thumb like green wood, was picked before its flesh finished developing, and the hardness is the firmness of a fruit that never softened into ripeness. A melon that gives too much, that feels soft and yielding under light pressure, has gone the other way, its flesh already breaking down inside the rind. What you are reading is the narrow window between those two states, and once your hand has learned the difference between stone and spring, it does not forget it. The press becomes instant, almost unconscious, a thing you do before you have decided to do it. The fourth signal is the one everyone has heard of and almost no one performs correctly, which is the sound the melon makes when you tap it. People tap melons constantly in grocery stores, knuckles drumming against rind, repeating a gesture they watched a parent or grandparent make without ever being told what the gesture was for. The sound is real information, but only if you know which sound you are listening for. You cup one hand against the side of the melon and strike the opposite side with the knuckles of the other, the way you would knock on a door, and you listen to the note that comes back. A ripe watermelon answers with a deep, low, hollow tone, the sound of a barrel half full of water, because that is essentially what it is, a vessel of loose water and dissolved sugar that resonates when struck. An unripe melon gives back a higher, tighter, duller sound, a flat thud rather than a resonant one, because its flesh is still dense and close-packed and has not yet developed the loose, water-heavy structure that rings. An overripe melon answers with something softer still, a padded, lifeless sound, the note of flesh that has begun to collapse. The trouble with the thump is that it asks you to hear a difference you may never have been taught to hear, which is why so many people perform the ritual without reading the result. But the difference is genuine, and once you have struck a melon you later confirmed was sweet, the deep barrel note becomes a sound you recognize for the rest of your life. The fifth signal is weight, and it is worth understanding carefully here because the same principle will return again and again with other fruits, and there is no reason to explain it more than once. A watermelon is almost entirely water, around 9 parts in 10 of its weight, and that water is the sugar and juice you are buying. 2 melons of the same size are not the same melon if one is noticeably heavier than the other, because the heavier one is denser with water, and the lighter one has either never filled out or has begun to dry. So you lift one, then lift another of the same size, and you let your hands compare them directly, because weight means almost nothing in the abstract, and almost everything in comparison. The melon that feels surprisingly heavy for how large it looks is the one carrying the most juice. This is the whole of the weight test, and it applies to nearly every fruit you will ever choose. Heavier for its size means denser with water and sugar, so from here on it needs only to be mentioned, never explained again. The last 2 signals are different from the others because they do not tell you about the sun or the vine or the water inside the fruit. They tell you about the bees. A watermelon flower must be visited many times by pollinators for the fruit to set a full complement of seeds, and the pattern of that pollination is written into the shape of the melon and faintly across its rind. When a flower is pollinated thoroughly by many bees across many visits, its seeds develop evenly all the way around, and the fruit grows out smooth and symmetrical, a clean round or a clean oval that tapers evenly from end to end. The sugars, which follow the seeds, distribute evenly through that even flesh. When a flower is pollinated poorly, the seeds set unevenly, and the melon grows lopsided, knobbed or flattened on one side, with sweetness that can be rich in one part of the flesh and thin in another. So a symmetrical melon is, in a real sense, the record of a flower the bees worked thoroughly, and an even shape correlates with even sweetness. This is a genuine relationship, but it is worth being honest about its limits. Shape is a sign, not a guarantee. Other things can distort a melon: uneven watering, a stone in the soil, a crowded vine, and a slightly irregular melon is not automatically a poor one. What the symmetry gives you is a probability, not a promise, and it is best used the way the careful old buyers used it, as one reading among several rather than a verdict on its own. The same caution applies to the final signal. The faint webbing sometimes threaded across the rind in thin, pale brown lines like the trace of a spider's web healed into the surface. Those lines form where the developing fruit was marked during pollination, and a melon carrying more of that webbing was, on average, a flower more heavily visited, which again tends to mean more seeds and more evenly distributed sugar. More webbing leans sweeter, but it leans. It does not certify. The webbing is a tiebreaker, the thing you check last when two melons have already passed every more important test and you need a reason to choose between them. And that is the right way to understand all 7 of these readings together, because none of them is meant to stand alone. The field spot tells you how long the melon ripened. The dried vine tells you whether the plant released it willingly. The give tells you whether the flesh is at its peak or past it. The thump confirms the loose, water-heavy structure of ripeness. The weight measures the juice directly. The shape and the webbing record what the bees made of the flower. Read one of them, and you are guessing with slightly better odds. Read all of them, and the guessing disappears, because the signals reinforce one another. And a melon that carries a deep, buttery belly, a dried, brown vine, a small, honest give, a deep, hollow note, a surprising weight, an even shape, and a faint tracery of webbing is not a gamble. It is a melon, the sun and the vine, and the bees finished properly, announcing itself to anyone who has learned to look. This is what the farm households meant when they walked a pile of melons and chose without hesitation. They were not luckier than the rest of us, and they were not performing a ritual they half remembered. They were reading a fruit that writes plainly on its own surface, in a language that has not changed and was never hidden. What changed was only the setting in which the reading happened. The melon at the roadside stand arrived much as it left the field, vine and belly and all, and every signal was available to anyone who knew to look. The melon in the distant supermarket arrives trimmed and stacked and sorted by size, its vine cut away, its belly turned down in the bin, often picked early so it could survive the journey at all. The signals that survive, the field spot you can still turn the melon over to find, the weight you can still compare, the give you can still feel, are the ones worth leaning on hardest in a modern store, and they are usually enough. The watermelon, then, is the place to begin, because it hides nothing. Its entire life is legible on the outside, and learning to read it teaches the habit that every other fruit will reward. Slowing down, turning the fruit over, asking it the few honest questions it is built to answer. The watermelon taught the first lesson plainly, because it keeps its diary on the outside where anyone can read it. The next fruit is quieter. It does not announce how long it ripened in colors and webbing spread across its rind. Instead, it hides almost its entire story in one and small place, at the scar where it once joined the vine, in the question of whether the plant released the fruit on its own or whether someone took it early. The cantaloupe rewards a different kind of attention than the watermelon, and learning to read it teaches a principle that will return again and again through the rest of this journey. That the most honest signal a fruit can give is the record of how it parted from the plant that made it. By the second week of August, the bins fill with them, round and oval, some pale and grayish, some the warm color of sand. They are stacked together as though they were all the same melon, and most people choose among them the way they choose among watermelons, by size or by whichever one looks prettiest under the store lights. They carry it home, cut it open a day or two later, and find pale orange flesh where they expected deep coral, a thick pale rind, and a first bite that is watery and almost without flavor, carrying that faint vegetable aftertaste that tells you the melon never finished. The disappointment feels once again like bad luck. It was not. That melon had been telling you it was picked too soon from the moment it sat in the bin, and the signals it used are even clearer than the watermelons once you know where to look. The first of them is a color, but not the color most people check. The eye goes naturally to the rough raised pattern that covers a cantaloupe, and people judge the melon by that. The real signal is underneath, in the smooth skin between the ridges of netting. On a melon that ripened fully on the vine, that background skin turns a creamy beige, a sandy gold, sometimes with a faint blush of warm yellow, because the green chlorophyll in the rind had time to break down completely as the fruit matured. The green is gone, and what remains is the buttery, sandy color of ripeness. On a melon picked too early, that same background skin is still green or a grayish green because the chlorophyll never had time to fade. The netting may look identical on both, but the skin beneath it does not lie. Beige and golden means the melon stayed on the vine. Green means it was taken before the vine was finished. That background color also reveals something about which kind of cantaloupe you are holding, and the distinction matters more than it first appears. The melons, piled in most supermarkets year-round, are the smoother, rounder, paler, more uniform type, bred above all to ship and to last. They look handsome in the bin, and they keep for a week in the kitchen, but their flavor tends to be mild and their aroma faint. The older eastern type, the true muskmelon, is the homelier fruit, more oblong, more deeply grooved, sometimes mottled with brown, and it carries the deep, perfumed sweetness that older shoppers remember from childhood kitchens. The reason the prettier melon dominates the store is not a matter of taste at all. It is a matter of what survives the journey and the shelf, and the qualities that make a melon ship well, firmness, uniformity, durability, are simply different from the qualities that make it taste like summer. The handsome melon won the bin not because it was sweeter, but because it traveled better. That is the whole structure of the produce aisle compressed into a single fruit, and it explains, without any need for a villain, why the melon that tastes the best is so rarely the melon stacked in front of you. The second signal is the netting itself, the rough raised cordwork laid across the rind. People notice that it is there, but very few notice how much of it there is, and the amount is the information. The netting develops slowly while the melon ripens on the vine, building up ridge by ridge over the weeks the fruit hangs on the plant. A melon that stayed on the vine until it was truly ripe carries thick, prominent, three-dimensional netting that you can feel under your fingers like fine cord pressed into the rind, every ridge raised and distinct. A melon picked too early carries thin, faint netting, sometimes so slight it is almost smooth because the rind was still developing when the fruit was cut, and the pattern never had the time to finish. The netting is, in effect, the rind's record of how many weeks the vine spent feeding the fruit. Run your hand across a pile of cantaloupes and the difference is immediate. The rough, raised, heavily netted melons had time to ripen, and the smooth, faintly netted ones did not. But the signal that decides almost everything sits at the stem end, in the small scar where the melon was once joined to the plant. And it carries the same logic we first met on the watermelon's dried tendril, refined here to its clearest form. A cantaloupe ripening on the vine does something the watermelon does not do so visibly. As the fruit reaches true ripeness, the plant forms a separation layer between the melon and its stem, a kind of natural seam, and stops feeding the fruit. At the moment of full ripeness, the melon detaches from the vine with the gentlest tug, sometimes falling away entirely on its own. Growers have a name for this. They call it full slip, and it is the plant's own signature that the fruit was finished. A melon that came away in full slip leaves behind a clean, smooth, slightly cupped indentation at the stem end, a small round hollow with no stub of stem remaining. Press a fingertip into it and it feels like the inside of a shallow bowl. That clean, concave scar is the single most reliable thing you can read on a cantaloupe, because it is the plant itself confirming the fruit was ripe enough to let go. The opposite is just as legible. A melon picked early, cut or pulled from the vine before the separation layer had formed, carries a stub of stem still attached, or a torn and ragged edge, or a flat surface where a knife went through. That melon did not release itself. It was taken while the vine was still feeding it, before it had finished, and the flesh inside will be underdeveloped no matter how promising the netting or the size. This is precisely the distinction the watermelon's brown, dried tendril was pointing toward, made unmistakable here because the cantaloupe writes the answer into the shape of its own scar. Full slip, a clean, cupped hollow, means the vine decided. A stub or a torn edge means a person decided and decided too soon. That one reading alone will set aside most of the disappointing melons in any bin. And it carries a consequence that shapes everything still to come in this fruit, one worth stating plainly because it returns with several others ahead. A cantaloupe does not grow any sweeter after it is picked. It will soften, and its texture will grow juicier as it sits, which fools a great many people into believing it is ripening. But the sugar it carried away from the vine is all the sugar it will ever have. A melon taken before full slip cannot finish on your counter, because the thing it was missing, the vine's last weeks of feeding, is exactly the thing the kitchen cannot supply. This is why the stem scar matters so much more on a cantaloupe than on fruits that go on ripening after harvest. With this melon, the reading you do in the store is the only reading that counts. The netting and the stem scar tell you how the melon grew and how it left the vine. The next test tells you what it carries inside, and it asks nothing of you that the watermelon did not already teach. You lift the cantaloupe, then lift another of the same size beside it, and you let your hands compare the two directly. A ripe melon, dense with sugar and water, feels heavier than its size suggests, while a light one has either never filled out on the vine or has begun to dry in storage. The principle is exactly the one the watermelon established. Heavier for its size means denser with juice, and it needs no further explaining here, only applying. The cantaloupe that surprises your hand with its weight is the one carrying the most inside. The one that feels airy for how large it looks has lost the very thing you came to buy. There is a smaller test that travels alongside the weight, and it is worth a moment because the cantaloupe answers it differently than the watermelon does. You tap the melon gently with your knuckles and listen to the note that returns, but you are not listening for the deep barrel boom of a ripe watermelon. A cantaloupe is a denser, more compact fruit, and a ripe one answers with a low, dull, solid sound, closer to tapping a closed fist than a hollow drum. An unripe cantaloupe gives back something higher and brighter, the thin hollow ring of an empty box, because its flesh has not yet developed the dense, water-heavy structure of ripeness. The difference is real, though it is subtler than the watermelons, and most people who tap a cantaloupe never know which sound they are hoping to hear. The low, dull note is the ripe one. The bright, hollow ring is not. But the test that decides a cantaloupe above all the others is the one almost no one performs, and it is the simplest of them all. You bring the melon up to your face, press your nose against the blossom end, the soft, round end opposite the stem scar, where the flower once was, and you breathe in slowly. A truly ripe cantaloupe answers with an unmistakable perfume, sweet and fruity and deeply musky, the smell that fills a summer kitchen the moment the fruit is carried inside. That scent is not a pleasant accident. It is the fruit's own announcement that its sugars and aromatic compounds have fully developed, and it is so characteristic that it gave this melon its other name. The musk melon is exactly this perfume, the deep, sweet signature of a fruit that finished on the vine. You can often smell it through the rind from across a market stall, and an eastern muskmelon at its peak will scent an entire room. The absence of that smell is just as clear a message. If you press your nose to the blossom end and find nothing, only the faint, green, vegetable smell that any unripe fruit carries, the melon is not ready, and on a cantaloupe that verdict is final. If instead the scent has turned sharp, sour, fermented, or chemical, like the smell of nail polish, the melon has gone the other way, and its flesh has begun to break down inside the rind. The window you are smelling for sits between those two failures, And once your nose has met a truly ripe muskmelon, it never mistakes the perfume again. You can press the blossom end gently with your thumb as you smell, and a slight give there, the same small spring you learned to feel on the watermelon's rind, releases more of the aroma and confirms what your nose already suspects. The reason this smell test matters so much more on a cantaloupe than on most fruit comes down to a single fact, and it is the fact that will define the entire next chapter, so it is worth stating plainly here for the first time. A cantaloupe does not grow any sweeter after it is picked. It will soften as it sits on the counter and its texture will turn juicier, which fools a great many people into believing the fruit is still ripening. But softening is not sweetening. The sugar the melon carried away from the vine is all the sugar it will ever have, because the vine was the only thing that could have made more, and the vine is gone. This means the perfume you smell in the store is the same perfume you will meet at the kitchen table, and the sweetness you fail to smell in the bin is sweetness that will never arrive. With this fruit, there is no repairing a poor choice at home. The reading you do over the bin is the only reading that counts. That single fact quietly reorganizes everything the careful buyer does with a cantaloupe. It is why the smell test sits at the center of the chapter rather than at its edge, why the stem scar matters so much, why there is no patience that can rescue a green-shouldered melon left hopefully on the windowsill. Every signal on the rind, the golden skin beneath the netting, the thick raised cordwork, the clean cupped scar of full slip, is pointing toward the same question the smell answers directly. Did this melon finish on the vine, or was it taken before the vine was done? Read together, the 5 signals leave very little to chance. A melon with sandy gold skin beneath heavy raised netting. A clean, concave scar where the vine released it. A surprising weight, a low, dull note, and a deep, musky perfume at the blossom end is not a gamble. It is a melon the vine finished and let go, telling you so in 5 different languages at once. And this is where the cantaloupe completes a lesson the watermelon only began. The watermelon taught that fruit keeps a record of its growing life on the outside. The cantaloupe adds the harder, more important truth, that for some fruit, the record is the whole story, because nothing about it can change once it leaves the plant. The melon at the roadside stand, arriving in full slip with its perfume intact, gave the old buyers everything they needed to know, and they knew to trust it because they understood there would be no second reading at home. The melon in the distant supermarket is harder because it is often picked before full slip so that it can survive the journey. Its stem cut rather than released. Its perfume still locked away. But the signals that survive shipping, the color beneath the netting, the weight you can compare, the scar you can still inspect, and above all the smell you can still test before you pay, are enough, and they reward the same patience the old buyers gave every melon they ever chose. The watermelon kept its diary on the rind, and the cantaloupe kept its in the scar where the vine released it. Both fruits forgave a careless eye because a misread melon cost only a single afternoon, and because both at least continued to soften on the counter, giving the hopeful buyer the comforting illusion that something was still happening. The pineapple offers no such comfort. It is the fruit that arrives having already finished, and learning to read it means accepting a hard fact the other fruits only hinted at, that for this fruit, and for several others, the choice you make in the store is the only choice you will ever get. The pineapple travels farther than almost anything else in the produce aisle. It is grown in the tropics, in Hawaii or Costa Rica or the Philippines, and it reaches a northern store by ship and refrigerated truck days or weeks after it left the field. The bins hold perhaps 50 of them, green and gold and armored, each crowned with a stiff fan of spiked leaves, and to most shoppers they are as interchangeable as the melons were. You lift one, feel its surprising weight, turn it in your hands, and set it back, because nothing about its armored shell seems to tell you anything. You choose the one that looks ripest and carry it home, and a day later, when you cut into it, you find pale flesh, fibrous and sharp, sour enough to sting the tongue, tasting more of cut grass than of anything tropical. You set the second one on the windowsill, certain it only needs another few days to come around. It never does. 3 days later, it is exactly as sour as the moment you bought it. That last detail is the whole of the chapter, and it is worth understanding precisely because it governs everything that follows. A pineapple does not ripen after it is picked. It is what scientists call a non-climacteric fruit, which means it carries no internal reserve of starch that converts to sugar after harvest, and it produces none of the ripening surge that would drive such a change. Whatever sweetness it accumulated while attached to the plant is the only sweetness it will ever have. A pineapple cut from the field underripe remains underripe forever, no matter how long it waits on the counter, no matter how golden its shell may turn, because the color of the skin can continue to shift even as the flesh inside stays exactly as sour as the day it was cut. It will soften, and it will eventually ferment and rot, but it will never sweeten. The windowsill, which feels like patience, is only a slow disappointment. This single fact divides the entire world of fruit into two kinds, and understanding the division is the master key this whole journey has been building toward. Some fruits go on ripening after they are picked, because they carry that reserve of starch and that ripening surge within them. The banana that yellows on the counter, the avocado that softens over a week, the peach and the pear that grow fragrant in a paper bag. These are the fruits the supply chain loves most because they can be picked hard and green, shipped without bruising, and left to finish on the shelf or in the kitchen. But other fruits carry no such reserve, and for them the moment of harvest is the end of the story. The pineapple is the clearest example of this second kind, and the watermelon and the cantaloupe belong to it as well, which is why their stem signals mattered so much. With every fruit in this second group, the rule is the same, and it is absolute. What you buy is what you get, and there is no fixing it later. That is why pineapple selection matters more than the selection of almost any other fruit, and why the few minutes spent reading one in the store are the most valuable minutes in the entire produce aisle. With a banana or an avocado, a mistake can be repaired with a little patience. With a pineapple, the reading you do over the bin is the only verdict that will ever be rendered. So the careful buyer slows down here more than anywhere else, and reads the fruit with the attention of fact that final deserves. The first reading is the color of the shell, though it is more nuanced than it first appears because a pineapple is not meant to be fully golden when you buy it. Pineapples bound for distant stores are picked partly ripe, firm enough to survive the long journey, and the color of the shell records exactly where in its development the fruit was cut. What you are looking for is a balance, a shell that is turning from green toward gold, mostly yellow or golden across the lower body near the base, with some green still holding near the crown, the color shading evenly from one to the other. That even progression of gold is the sign of a fruit that was allowed to develop on the plant before it was taken. A pineapple that is uniformly deep green from base to crown was cut too early, and because it cannot ripen further, it will stay as sour as it looks. A pineapple that has gone entirely dark orange gold, especially with softening or browning at the base, has gone too far, its flesh turning to mush and beginning to ferment. The band between those two failures, golden below, a touch of green above, even and bright, is where ripeness lives. The one caution is variety, because a few kinds of pineapple are bred to stay greener even when ripe, which is exactly why color is the first reading and never the last. The second reading sits at the top of the fruit in the crown of stiff leaves that most shoppers ignore entirely, and it tells you not about ripeness, but about freshness, how long the fruit has been sitting since it was cut. A fresh pineapple carries a crown of leaves that are firm and vividly green, standing tall and full from the top of the fruit. As the pineapple sits in storage, those leaves keep drawing what little moisture they can from the fruit until the connection finally dries out, and they begin to brown at the tips, shrivel along their edges, and wilt. A little browning on the very tips of the longest outer leaves is normal, because those dry fastest in transit. But a crown that has gone broadly brown, dried, and limp, is telling you the fruit has been sitting far too long, and even a pineapple that was picked at the right moment will have begun to decline beneath an old, withered crown. Bright and firm and green means recently cut. Brown and dry and collapsing means time has passed, and not in the fruit's favor. The third reading is the one that asks you to touch the fruit and it is the most reliable single test on a pineapple because it measures the ripening state directly rather than inferring it from color. You steady the fruit at its base with one hand, take hold of one of the inner leaves of the crown, not an outer one, and pull gently upward with a slow, steady pressure. The leaf answers according to how ripe the fruit is. As a pineapple ripens, the structural connection between the crown leaves and the body of the fruit naturally weakens. So on a ripe pineapple, an inner leaf releases with a small, easy effort, sliding free without resistance. On an underripe pineapple, that connection is still firm, and the leaf will not give at all no matter how you pull. The test is a direct measurement of the fruit's internal readiness, more trustworthy than the shell color it confirms, and it needs only a gentle hand. One inner leaf, one steady pull, one clear answer. The only caveat is the far end of the scale. A leaf that falls out at the lightest touch almost on its own can mean the fruit has slipped just past its peak, which is why this reading too is best confirmed against the color and against the tests still to come. The color, the crown, and the leaf pull tell you where the pineapple stands in its ripening and how long it has waited since the field. The next reading measures what it carries inside, and it asks nothing new of you, because the principle was settled at the very first fruit. You lift one pineapple, lift another of the same size beside it, and let your hands compare the two. A ripe pineapple, its cells swollen with sugar-rich juice, feels heavier than its size suggests, while a lighter fruit of the same dimensions holds less water and more dry, starchy fiber. Heavier for its size means denser with juice, exactly as it did with the melons, and the heaviest pineapple in the bin, all else being equal, is the likeliest to be the sweetest. The pineapple that feels surprisingly light for its bulk has either never filled out or has begun to dry, and no leaf pull or color will redeem it. But the reading that confirms all the others, and on this fruit may be the most telling of them all, is the one you perform with your nose. You turn the pineapple over so its base faces you, the blunt end where the fruit was joined to the plant, opposite the crown, and you breathe in slowly. A ripe pineapple answers there with a deep, sweet, unmistakably tropical perfume, the smell of the fruit itself concentrated and rising from the porous base. That scent is not decoration. It is the physical evidence that the fruit's sugars and its volatile aromatic compounds have fully developed. And because those compounds escape most freely through the base is where the fruit speaks most clearly. When the smell is strong and sweet, the sugars are there. The nose is reading the ripeness directly. The absence of that smell carries the same weight here that it carried with the cantaloupe, and for the same reason, because this fruit, too, will never grow any sweeter than it is. If you press your nose to the base and find nothing, only a faint green nothing, the sugars never developed, and they never will. If instead the smell has turned sharp, sour, vinegary, or faintly of alcohol, the fruit has gone the other way, its sugars already fermenting inside the shell. The window you are smelling for sits between those two failures, the deep, sweet, tropical note that means a fruit picked at its peak. One caution travels with this test, the same one that travels with every aroma test. A pineapple straight from the store's refrigerated section releases very little scent, because cold suppresses the volatile compounds you are trying to smell. A pineapple that has sat at room temperature for an hour will tell you far more than one just lifted from the chill, which is worth remembering when the base seems to say nothing at all. There is a smaller visual confirmation worth knowing in the pattern of the shell itself. The hexagonal segments that armor a pineapple, the eyes, are the remnants of the many individual flowers that fuse together to form the single fruit. Each eye a flower's healed scar. On a ripe pineapple, those eyes are flat, broad, and evenly colored across the shell, settled and full. On an underripe one, they are sharper and more sharply raised, still pointed where ripeness would have smoothed them. On an overripe fruit, they have begun to darken, soften, or sink inward, the first sign of the flesh collapsing beneath. The eyes will not decide a pineapple on their own, but they are a quick, honest confirmation that the color, the leaf pull, the weight, and the smell are all pointing the same way. And there is one last reading, less a test of ripeness than a guard against spoilage, and it asks you to do the thing the display is quietly arranged to discourage. You turn the pineapple fully over and look at the base, because the base is where mold, fermentation, and rot announce themselves first, in soft, darkened, weeping patches, in white or bluish fuzz, in leaking juice, in that sharp, fermented smell. It is no accident that pineapples are so often stacked crown up in the bin, standing proud on their leaves with their bases hidden against the shelf. The base is the fruit's most vulnerable point, the first place to fail, and a fruit displayed base down is a fruit showing you only its best face. Lifting it to inspect the underside is the simplest discipline in the entire chapter, and it is the one that saves you from carrying home a fruit already turning beneath a perfect crown. Gathered together, these readings make a fruit that seemed sealed and unreadable speak as plainly as any melon. The color, golden below and faintly green above, tells you it was allowed to develop on the plant. The crown, firm and green, tells you it was recently cut. The leaf pull, an inner leaf sliding free with a small, steady effort, measures the ripeness directly. The weight tells you the juice is there. The aroma at the base confirms the sugars have arrived. The eyes and the underside confirm the fruit is sound. No single one is a verdict, but together they leave very little to chance, and a pineapple that passes all of them is not a gamble, but a fruit announcing, in several languages at once, that it finished properly in the field. This is where the pineapple completes the lesson the cantaloupe began, and sharpens it into the rule that organizes everything still ahead. The cantaloupe taught that some fruit cannot improve after it is picked. The pineapple makes that rule absolute and unforgettable, because it offers not even the softening that fooled the hopeful cantaloupe buyer into believing something was happening on the windowsill. A pineapple cut underripe stays exactly that sour, exactly that fibrous, exactly that disappointing, for as long as it sits, until at last it rots without ever having sweetened. There is no second reading, no patience that helps, no repair available in any kitchen. Whatever the field gave it is all it will ever be. With this fruit, more than any other, the few minutes spent reading it over the bin are the only minutes that will ever matter. And once that rule is fully grasped, it changes the way the careful buyer stands in front of every fruit, because the first and most important question is no longer how a fruit looks, but which kind of fruit it is. One that goes on ripening after harvest, or one that does not. For the pineapple, the watermelon, the cantaloupe, the answer is the same, and it is final. Read it now, because there will be no reading later. We will meet the opposite case before this journey ends, the fruit that is meant to be bought hard and finished at home, and the contrast will throw the whole framework into relief. The pineapple taught the hardest rule of all, that some fruit arrives already finished and can never be improved. But at least the pineapple was honest about its difficulty. It looked armored and unreadable, and it was, until you learned its signals. The orange is a more troubling fruit because it looks simple and familiar, and it lies. It is the first fruit in this journey that will tell you one thing with its color while the truth sits somewhere else entirely. And learning to read it means learning, for the first time, not to trust the most obvious thing about a fruit, the very quality its name describes. The bins fill with them in the cooler months, when the melons are gone and the pineapples thin out. Oranges shipped north from Florida and California and stacked in great bright piles near the front of the store. 200 of them. And to the eye they are as interchangeable as any fruit we have met. The same round shape, the same vivid color, the same size, sorted by the same distant machine. You lift one, turn it in your hand, set it back, lift another, and choose by the only thing that seems to vary, which is almost nothing. You carry 4 home. And a day later, peeling the first one for the table, you find it dry and stringy inside, the juice thin, the flavor sharp and bitter, and the disappointment is the same disappointment the melons gave you, except that the orange looked perfect the entire time. Its color promised everything. Its inside delivered nothing. The reason is that the color of an orange is the least reliable signal it carries, And understanding why begins to dismantle the one assumption almost every shopper brings to the bin. We assume a deep orange color means ripeness, the way it would in a tomato or a peach. But citrus does not work that way. The color of the rind is driven as much by temperature and weather as by ripeness. And an orange can be fully sweet inside while still wearing patches of green, or be dyed and waxed to a flawless orange while being thin and sour within. The color is the first thing your eye lands on and the last thing you should trust, which is why the careful reading of an orange begins everywhere except its color. It begins, instead, with shape. Most people assume every orange is simply round, but if you look carefully across a bin, you will see two forms mixed together. Some are perfectly round, like a small ball. Others are slightly oval, a little longer on one axis, tapering gently toward the ends like an egg standing upright. The difference looks trivial, but it records something real about how the fruit grew. An orange that grew during a stretch of consistent water and steady nutrition tends to develop thinner skin and more flesh, and that fuller, more generous growth often produces the slightly oval form. An orange that grew under stress, less water, less light, an interrupted season, tends to put more of itself into rind and less into juice, and that stunted, defensive growth tends toward the harder, rounder, thicker-skinned fruit. The oval orange is, on average, the juicier and sweeter one. The perfectly round one is the gamble. It is not an absolute law, and shape alone never decides a fruit, but it is the first sorting, the way to thin a bin of 200 down to the candidates worth examining closely. The second reading sits at one end of the fruit, in the small dimpled crater that gives the navel orange its name, and here we meet a piece of folk knowledge that is worth handling with care, because it is half folklore and half genuine biology. The old market language divided oranges into two kinds by the look of that navel. An orange with a small, tight, smooth navel was called one thing, and an orange with a large, deep, open, split navel was called another, and the names themselves were folk classification with no scientific standing. But the observation beneath the names was sound, and the biology explains it. A navel orange carries a small secondary fruit growing inside the main one, at the navel end, and that secondary fruit draws nutrients and sugar from the main fruit as both develop. When the navel is large, deep, and split wide open, the secondary fruit grew large and took a meaningful share of the main orange's sugar with it, leaving the fruit around it less sweet and less full. When the navel is small, tight, and barely visible, the secondary fruit stayed small and took very little, and the main orange kept its sweetness for itself. So the folk rule, choose the small, tight navel over the large, gaping one, rests on a real mechanism, even though the names attached to it were never anything more than market shorthand. It is worth knowing exactly that much. Trust the observation, set aside the folklore, and read the navel as a quiet report on how much the fruit had to share. The third reading is the one most shoppers never perform, because it asks them to look at the end of the orange opposite the navel, where the stem once joined the branch. That stem end is the fruit's freshness gauge, and it works on the same logic the watermelon's dried vine and the pineapple's crown both followed. The moment a fruit is cut from the plant, it begins, slowly, to lose moisture, and the cut point is where that loss first shows. A recently picked orange carries a stem end that is still green or partly green, slightly moist where it was cut, sometimes with a small leaf or a fresh dark scar. An orange that has sat in storage for weeks carries a stem end that is dried, browned, shriveled, or fallen away entirely, the cut surface gone gray and papery. Green and moist means recently off the tree. Brown and dry means a long time in storage, and a long time in storage means moisture lost, juice diminished, flavor faded. There is an honesty worth keeping about this test in a modern store. Citrus shipped north by truck takes days to arrive, so you will almost never find a perfectly green, just cut stem in a supermarket bin. What you are looking for instead is the better of what is there. A stem end that is at least partly green and not yet fully shriveled, against neighbors that have gone completely brown and dry. The comparison is the whole of it. Flip the orange over to read the navel for sweetness, then check the other end for freshness. And a single fruit has told you two separate things from its two opposite ends: how much sugar it kept, and how long it has been waiting since the tree let it go. The shape, the navel, and the stem have already told you a great deal about an orange before you ever consider the thing your eye saw first, which is its color. And now we come to it, because the color of an orange is the most misleading signal in the entire produce aisle. And learning to read it correctly means learning to read it last, and to trust it least. The assumption almost everyone carries is simple and wrong: that a deep, even orange color means a ripe, sweet fruit, the way a deep red means a ripe tomato or a golden blush means a ripe peach. With most fruit, color tracks ripeness, because the pigments develop as the sugars develop. Citrus does not obey that rule. The color of an orange rind is driven as much by the weather as by the fruit's ripeness, and in particular by temperature. The bright orange we associate with the fruit develops when the rind is exposed to cool nights, which break down the green chlorophyll and let the orange pigments beneath show through. In a warm climate, an orange can be fully ripe and perfectly sweet inside while its skin stays partly green, because the cool nights that would have colored it never came. The fruit finished. The rind simply never got the signal to change costume. The clearest proof of how thoroughly color can lie is a phenomenon that runs in the opposite direction, and it is worth understanding because it overturns the rule completely. Certain late-season oranges picked in spring and summer can actually turn from orange back toward green as they hang on the tree, while growing sweeter the entire time. Warm spring weather draws chlorophyll back into the rind from the surrounding leaves, tinting a ripe fruit green again at the stem end. This is called regreening, and it produces the strangest situation in all of fruit selection: an orange that looks less ripe precisely because it has ripened further. A patch of green near the stem of one of these late oranges is not a warning. It is often a sign of a fruit that stayed on the tree long into the warm season, accumulating sugar the whole time. The eye reads it as unripe. The fruit is the opposite. And the color can lie in the other direction too, this time by human hand rather than weather. Because shoppers have been trained to equate orange color with quality, the industry has long worked to give them what they expect. Oranges shipped long distances are commonly waxed to slow moisture loss and improve their shine. And in some markets, particularly for early season fruit picked while still green, the rinds have historically been dyed to a uniform orange before reaching the bin. A dyed, waxed orange can look flawless across its entire surface, while the flesh inside is thin, dry, and sharp. The perfect color you are admiring may be the one thing about that fruit a person decided you should see. This is the deepest reason to treat color as the least trustworthy reading on the orange. It can be faked, it can be reversed by weather, and it responds to conditions that have nothing to do with the sugar inside. None of this means color is useless. It means color is a first filter, not a verdict. Across a bin, deep and even color is still, on balance, a better sign than pale, washed out, or splotchy color, and there is a real principle hidden inside it worth carrying to every fruit. An orange that grew on the sunny outer face of the tree, bathed in direct light through the day, develops more sugar and deeper color than one that grew in the shade of the inner canopy. You can never know which side of which tree your particular orange came from, but the principle holds statistically across a bin. The most deeply and evenly colored fruits are, on average, the ones that grew in the most light, and the palest are the ones that grew in shadow. So you let color narrow the field, set aside the obviously pale and the obviously splotchy, and then ignore it entirely while the more honest tests decide. Deep color earns an orange a second look. It never earns it a place in the cart on its own. The final readings are the ones your hands perform, and they confirm what the eye only suspected. The first is the weight, and it asks nothing new because the principle was settled at the very first fruit of this journey. You lift one orange, lift another of the same size, and let your hands compare them. The heavier of the two holds more juice because juice is water and water is weight, while the lighter one of equal size is drier inside, more rind, and more air. Heavier for its size means juicier, the same law that ran through the melons and the pineapple, And on an orange, it is one of the single most reliable signals you can read, precisely because it measures the thing you actually want. An orange that feels surprisingly heavy in the hand is dense, with juice. One that feels light for its size has already begun to dry, or never filled. The second is the press, and it reads the condition of the fruit and the thickness of its skin in a single touch. You cradle the orange in your palm and press gently with your thumb, asking the same question you learned to ask the watermelon's rind. A good orange answers with a slight, firm elasticity. It yields just a little under the pressure and springs back, the feel of a thin skin over full, mature flesh. An orange that is rock hard and will not yield at all has a thick, tough rind and underdeveloped flesh beneath it, the fruit picked too early. An orange that feels soft, that gives too easily or stays dented, has flesh that is breaking down inside, past its peak and on its way to spoiling. The window you are pressing for is that narrow, firm but elastic spring, the give of a small ball that has lost just a breath of its air, and it tells you in a single squeeze that the skin is thin and the flesh is ripe. Gathered together, these readings turn the most deceptive fruit in the bin into one of the most legible. The shape sorts the juicy oval from the thick-skinned round. The navel reports how much sugar the fruit had to share. The stem end reveals how long it has waited since the tree. The weight measures the juice directly, and the press confirms the skin is thin and the flesh mature. And color, the thing you saw first, falls into its proper place at the very end. A hint, never a verdict. A quality so easily reversed by weather and so easily faked by hand that the careful buyer reads everything else first and lets the eye have the last and smallest word. This is the lesson the orange adds to everything the melons and the pineapple taught. The watermelon showed that fruit keeps a record on its surface. The cantaloupe and the pineapple showed that for some fruit that record is final, because nothing changes after the harvest. The orange adds a harder warning still, that the most obvious signal a fruit gives can be the one most likely to deceive you, whether by an accident of climate or by deliberate design. To read fruit well is not only to look, but to know which of the things you see can be trusted and which cannot, and to give your trust, in the end, to the signals that are hardest to fake. Weight cannot be dyed. The give of a thin skin cannot be waxed on. The fruit's true condition lives in the readings the eye cannot perform alone. The orange taught a hard lesson about appearance, that the most obvious quality of a fruit can be the one most likely to deceive. The next fruit takes that lesson and turns it in a new direction, because here the deception is not about color reversing or being faked. It is about size. The strawberry is the fruit people choose by reaching for the biggest and the brightest in the basket, and it is precisely there, in the reflex to equate large with good, that the eye leads them most badly astray. Learning to read a strawberry means unlearning one of the most stubborn assumptions a shopper carries to the bin: the belief that bigger is better. With this fruit, very often the smallest and plainest berry is the sweetest of them all. The clamshells arrive in late spring and through the early summer, stacked in plastic boxes under the cold lights, the berries inside arranged so the largest and reddest face outward through the clear sides. They look magnificent. They are enormous, glossy, uniform, the kind of strawberry that belongs on a magazine cover. You carry a box home, and at the kitchen table, you find the truth that so many of those perfect-looking berries hide. The flesh inside is pale and white at the core. The texture is firm and watery rather than tender, and the flavor is faint, a vague suggestion of strawberry behind a wash of sourness and water. The most beautiful berries in the box are often the most disappointing, and the reason is the same structural reason that has run through every chapter of this story. The strawberry, like the pineapple and the melons before it, does not grow any sweeter after it is picked. It will soften a little and it will darken on the surface as it ages, but the sugar it carried out of the field is all the sugar it will ever have, because the plant was the only thing that could have made more. This single fact makes the strawberry one of the most demanding fruits in the entire produce aisle, because it is also one of the most fragile, And the supply chain solution to that fragility is exactly the thing that hollows out its flavor. A strawberry bound for a distant store is bred and picked above all to survive the journey, to be firm enough to stack, large enough to look impressive, and red enough on the surface to sell. Those qualities have almost nothing to do with sweetness, and some of them work directly against it. The giant, glossy, rock-firm berry was selected for the truck. The reading skill we are recovering is, in large part, the skill of telling the berry bread for the table from the berry bread for the road. The first reading is color, and it is more exacting on a strawberry than on almost any other fruit because of that one rule about ripening. Since the berry cannot sweeten after picking, the color you see is a near final report on the sugar inside. And what you are reading is not merely whether the berry is red, but how completely red it is. A truly ripe strawberry is a deep, rich, even red across its entire surface, all the way up to the shoulders where it meets the leafy cap, and all the way down to the very tip. There is no patch of paler color, no zone of orange or pink, no break in the red anywhere on the fruit. That complete, uniform redness is the sign of a berry that stayed on the plant until it had finished, coloring evenly as its sugars developed. The single most useful thing to look for is the part of the berry almost everyone overlooks, which is the shoulder, the broad top of the strawberry just beneath the green cap. This is the last part of the fruit to ripen and color, and it is therefore the first place an early pick gives itself away. A berry with a ring of white, pale green, or hard pinkish color around its shoulder was cut from the plant before it was done, and because it cannot ripen further, that white shoulder is a permanent confession. The flesh beneath it will be sour and underdeveloped no matter how long the berry sits. The deep red lower body may promise sweetness, but the pale shoulder overrules the promise. When you look at a clamshell, you are looking past the glossy red faces turned outward and checking the shoulders, because the shoulders are where the truth lives. Red to the very top means the plant finished its work. A pale collar beneath the cap means it did not. The second reading sits at that same end of the fruit in the cap and stem, and it tells you not about ripeness, but about freshness. How long the berry has been off the plant. The strawberry is among the most perishable fruits in the store, beginning to decline within a day or two of harvest. So freshness matters here more than it does for the hardy melons or the armored pineapple. A freshly picked strawberry carries a cap of leaves that is vivid green, firm, and full, standing crisp against the red of the fruit with a stem that looks fresh rather than dried. As the berry ages, the cap is the first part to fade, wilting, drying at the edges and turning from bright green toward a dull khaki and finally brown. A berry with a fresh, green, perky cap was picked recently. A berry whose cap has gone limp, dried, and brown has been sitting for days, and whatever sweetness it had is already retreating as the fruit softens toward spoilage. The cap reveals one more thing worth knowing. In the small ring of color where the leaves meet the fruit. On a fully ripe berry that ring is red, the color running right up under the cap. On an underripe berry there is often a halo of white or pale flesh circling the stem beneath the green, the same early pick signal the shoulder gives, confirmed a second time at the very center of the cap. So the top of a strawberry, like the two ends of an orange, carries two separate pieces of information at once. The green of the cap tells you how fresh the berry is, and the color beneath it tells you whether the berry ever finished ripening. A bright green cap over deep red shoulders is a berry that was picked ripe and picked recently, which is exactly the berry you are hunting for in a box where most of the others were chosen for their size. The color and the cap tell you whether a strawberry finished ripening and how long ago it was picked. The next reading tells you whether its sugars and aromas have truly developed. And it is the easiest test in the entire chapter because a ripe strawberry will reach out and announce itself before you have even decided to check. You lift the box or bend toward the open tray and you breathe in. A truly ripe strawberry fills the air around it with a deep, sweet, unmistakable fragrance, the smell of summer concentrated into a small red fruit, strong enough that a good basket scents the space around it from an arm's length away. That perfume is the direct chemical evidence of ripeness, the volatile aromatic compounds that develop alongside the sugars, and on a strawberry the two travel together so closely that the smell is very nearly a measurement of the sweetness. The absence of that smell is the clearest warning a strawberry can give, and it is the test that exposes the beautiful, disappointing berries most reliably. If you bring a box of large, glossy, perfectly red strawberries to your face and smell almost nothing, only a faint green coolness or no scent at all, you are holding fruit that was picked before its aromas developed, and on a fruit that cannot ripen further, that missing perfume will never arrive. The berry that looks magnificent and smells of nothing is the central trap of the strawberry aisle. Beauty is easy to ship. Fragrance is not. When the smell is faint, the sugar is faint no matter how flawless the red, and the opposite warning matters too. A smell that has turned sharp, fermented, or musty signals fruit beginning to spoil, the sweetness already collapsing into decay. The window you are smelling for is the deep, clean, summery sweetness in between, and it is the single most honest thing a strawberry will ever tell you. The next reading is the one your fingers perform through the side of the box, and it draws a line between two kinds of firmness that look identical but mean opposite things. A good strawberry is firm in a particular way, plump, taut, and resilient, the flesh full and yielding just slightly to gentle pressure, the way ripe fruit should. A berry that has gone soft, that dents under the lightest touch or shows dark bruised patches and weeping juice, has begun to spoil. And in a packed box, one spoiling berry will quickly take its neighbors with it. So a box with soft or leaking fruit is a box to set down. But there is a second kind of firmness that is more deceptive, and learning to recognize it is the heart of reading this fruit. The giant supermarket strawberry that feels rock hard, almost crisp, dense, and unyielding all the way through, is not firm because it is fresh. It is firm because it was bred and picked that way hard enough to survive shipping, and that same hardness very often comes with a pale, hollow, watery core and a flavor that never developed. Ripe firm is plump and resilient. Bred firm is hard and crisp, and it is the texture of a berry chosen for the truck rather than the table. And that brings us to the surprise that overturns the whole reflex shoppers bring to the strawberry basket. The reason the smallest and plainest berry so often beats the largest and most beautiful. The instinct is to reach for the biggest strawberries because in most things bigger seems better, and because the giant berries are the ones arranged to face outward through the clear plastic. But size in a strawberry is not a measure of sweetness. It is very often the opposite. The varieties bred to grow enormous were selected for exactly that. Size, uniformity, durability, the visual impact that sells a box from across the aisle. And those traits compete directly against flavor, because a berry pouring its energy into bulk and shipping strength has less to pour into sugar and aroma. The flavor of a strawberry is concentrated, and concentration is the enemy of size. A small or medium berry has less water diluting its sugars and less distance for those sugars to spread, so the same sweetness is packed into a smaller, more intense fruit. This is why the old market eye distrusted the giant berry and reached for the modest one, and why the deep red, fragrant, medium strawberry, the homely one passed over by every shopper chasing size, is so often the sweetest fruit in the entire display. The smallest berries on a wild or older plant can be almost overwhelming in their intensity, all flavor and no waste, while the showcase berry the size of a small plum can taste of little more than cold water. None of this means the largest berry is always poor or the smallest always superb. It means that size tells you nothing useful about sweetness, and that the eye, left to itself, will reliably lead you toward the wrong fruit. The reading that matters is the deep, even red to the shoulders, the fresh green cap, and above all the fragrance. And once those three agree, a smaller berry that passes them will almost always beat a larger one that does not. Gathered together, these readings turn the most appearance-driven fruit in the store into one that can be read with real confidence. The full red to the shoulders and the color beneath the cap tell you the berry finished ripening. The fresh green cap tells you it was picked recently. The deep summery fragrance confirms the sugars are there. The plump, resilient firmness tells you the flesh is sound, while the hard, crisp density warns you it was bred for the road. And the size, the thing the eye reaches for first, falls away entirely as a measure of quality, revealed as the very signal most likely to mislead. The berry that passes every honest test is rarely the one the display was arranged to sell you. It is the modest, fragrant, deeply red one a few rows back, the one the careful eye learns to find. This is the lesson the strawberry adds to everything the journey has taught so far. The orange warned that a fruit's most obvious quality can be the one most likely to deceive. The strawberry sharpens that warning to its finest point, because here the deception is not weather or dye, but the entire shape of what the supply chain selects for: size, gloss, and shipping strength bred into the fruit at the direct expense of the flavor you actually want. To read a strawberry well is to see past the beautiful berry to the fragrant one, and in doing so to understand, more clearly than any chapter yet, that the produce aisle is arranged around appearance, because appearance is what survives the journey and sells from a distance. The flavor was never the point of the display, it only ever lived in the reading. Every fruit we have met until now has obeyed a single, unbending rule. The watermelon, the cantaloupe, the pineapple, the orange, the strawberry, all of them must be bought ripe, because not one of them will grow any sweeter once it leaves the plant. For 5 chapters that rule has been the ground beneath our feet, the reason the reading in the store mattered so completely, the reason a poor choice could never be repaired at home. And now we come to the fruit that breaks it. The avocado does not finish on the plant at all. It is meant to be bought hard and unready, carried home green and unyielding, and ripened on the kitchen counter over the days that follow. To read it well, you must turn nearly everything the other fruits taught you upside down, and in doing so, you finally see why their rule existed in the first place. The avocado sits in its own bin near the produce wall, dark and pebbled and heavy, and it is the fruit that defeats more shoppers than almost any other. The complaint is always the same and always two-sided. Either you cut into one, expecting ripeness, and find it hard as a stone, the flesh pale and rubbery and impossible to spread, or you wait what feels like the right number of days, cut in at last, and find brown strings and black rot where the green should have been. The avocado seems to spend its entire life skipping from unready straight to ruined, with no right moment in between. People come to believe the fruit is simply impossible, a gamble that cannot be won. It is not. The avocado is one of the most readable fruits in the entire store, once you understand the single fact that governs it. That fact is the mirror image of the pineapples. The avocado is a climacteric fruit, which means it carries within it a reserve of starch and oils and the internal ripening surge that converts and softens them after harvest. Unlike the pineapple, which is finished the moment it is cut, the avocado does almost all of its ripening off the tree. In fact, it will not ripen properly while still attached. The fruit can hang on the branch for months, growing larger and richer in oil, but it stays rock hard the whole time, and only begins to soften once it is picked. The tree, in effect, is the avocado's storage cupboard, and harvest is the signal that starts the clock. This is why the avocado is sold hard and green, and why the disappointment of cutting into a stone is not a sign of a bad fruit at all. It is a sign of a fruit that simply has not been given its days yet. This single fact reorganizes everything, and it is the master key the whole journey has been building toward. With the pineapple and the melons, the only question that mattered was whether the fruit had finished ripening before it was picked, because nothing could change afterward. With the avocado, that question is meaningless. None of them are finished when you buy them, and a new question takes its place. The question is no longer whether the fruit is ripe, but how far along it is and how many days it needs before it reaches the narrow window of perfection. You are not choosing a ripe avocado. You are choosing where in its ripening you want to catch it, and timing your purchase to the day you intend to eat it. The reading you do in the store is not a verdict on the past, it is a forecast of the future. The first reading, then, is firmness. And on this fruit, firmness is not a single test, but a sliding scale you learn to read along its whole length. You cradle the avocado in your palm, Never press with a single fingertip, which bruises the flesh beneath and leaves a dark spot for whoever takes the fruit home. But close your whole hand gently around it and squeeze with even, distributed pressure. The avocado answers according to where it stands in its ripening, and that answer is not a simple yes or no, but a position on a journey from stone to ruin. A rock-hard avocado that gives nothing at all is days away, freshly off the tree or freshly out of cold storage, and it needs time on the counter before it is anything you would want to eat. An avocado that yields slightly under gentle, even pressure, firm but no longer hard, with the faintest give like the flesh of a ripe pear's neck, is ripe and ready, or within a day of it. An avocado that gives easily, that feels soft all over and holds the dent of your hand, has gone too far, its flesh inside already darkening and turning to brown string. This is why the avocado defeats so many shoppers, and why the defeat is needless once you understand the scale. The fruit is not asking to be caught at a single magic moment in the bin. It is asking you to read where it is on its arc and buy accordingly. If you intend to eat it tonight, you want the one that already yields gently. If you are shopping for the weekend, you want the firmer one that will arrive at that gentle give in 2 or 3 days on your counter. The careful buyer does not pick the ripe avocado. The careful buyer picks the avocado whose ripening will meet the day they need it. And that single shift in thinking, from choosing ripeness to choosing timing, is the whole art of the fruit. The second reading is a small trick that lets you see inside the avocado without cutting it, and it is the most useful confirmation the fruit offers. At the top of every avocado, where it once joined the stem, there is a small dried nub or shallow scar, and that nub can often be flicked or lifted away with a thumbnail. What lies beneath it is a window into the flesh. If the little stem nub comes away easily and reveals green underneath, fresh and bright, the avocado is ripe and good, the green of the scar matching the green of the flesh you are hoping for. If the nub will not come away, the fruit is not yet ripe, still holding firmly to its stem the way an underripe fruit holds to everything. And if the nub comes away to reveal brown, beneath, dark, and dry, the fruit is overripe, and that brown at the stem is the same brown you would find spreading through the flesh inside. This single check, performed in a moment at the top of the fruit, confirms what the squeeze suggested and guards you against the avocado that feels right in the hand but has already begun to spoil from the stem inward. The third reading is color, and here the avocado carries the same warning the orange taught, sharpened by variety. The dark, pebbled, almost black avocados that fill most stores do change color as they ripen, shifting from green toward a deep purplish black as the flesh softens, so that on this common type the darkening skin is a genuine, if rough, signal of ripeness. But there are other varieties, the larger, smoother, brighter green kinds, that stay green even when perfectly ripe, never darkening at all, so that judging them by color alone would leave you waiting forever for a change that is never coming. The color of an avocado means something only once you know which avocado you are holding, and even then it means far less than the firmness and the stem nub, which read the flesh directly rather than guessing at it from the skin. Color narrows the field on the dark varieties and is nearly useless on the green ones, which is exactly why the hand and the thumbnail decide, and the eye only suggests. The weight, which decided so much for the melons and the citrus, plays a smaller part here because an avocado is meant to be dense and heavy regardless of ripeness, its flesh rich with oil rather than water. What you are guarding against with weight on an avocado is not dryness, but hollowness and rot. A fruit that feels surprisingly light for its size may have flesh that has shrunk and separated from the skin inside, pulling away as it spoils, sometimes audible as a faint rattle of the pit knocking loose within. A good avocado feels solid and heavy and whole in the hand, with no rattle and no give in patches. The weight here is less a measure of quality than a final check for soundness, the same instinct that turned the pineapple over to inspect its base. And this brings the avocado to the strategy that completes it, the practical method that grows directly out of its reversed nature. Because the fruit ripens on the counter rather than the vine, The wise approach is not to buy a single avocado and hope, but to read the bin as a timeline and buy across it. You choose one that is already soft for tonight, one that is firm with a little give for tomorrow, and a hard one or two for later in the week, and you let your kitchen counter become the orchard branch the fruit never had. When one reaches the gentle give you are waiting for, and you are not ready to use it, you move it to the cold, which slows its ripening and holds it for several days. The one fruit in this entire journey where the refrigerator is a tool of timing rather than a mistake. The avocado, alone among everything we have read, rewards the buyer who thinks not about the moment of purchase, but about the days that follow it. Gathered together, these readings turn the most frustrating fruit in the store into one of the most controllable. The firmness places the fruit on its arc from stone to ripe to ruined. The stem nub opens a window into the flesh and confirms the squeeze. The color narrows the field, on the varieties where it means anything at all. The weight checks for soundness, and the whole of it is governed by a single strategic truth that no other fruit in this journey shares, that this is fruit you are meant to buy unready and finish yourself, fruit whose perfect moment you schedule rather than catch. And in that truth, the avocado does something none of the other 5 fruits could do. It explains them. For 5 chapters, we read fruit under one unspoken rule, that ripeness must be caught at the moment of purchase, because nothing improves after the harvest. The watermelon, the cantaloupe, the pineapple, the orange, the strawberry all obeyed it, and it made the reading in the store feel like the only reading that would ever matter. The avocado breaks that rule completely, and in breaking it reveals that the rule was never about fruit in general at all. It was about a single dividing line that runs invisibly through the entire produce aisle, separating the fruit that finishes on the plant from the fruit that finishes in your kitchen. Once you can see that line, every fruit in the store sorts itself, and the dozens of separate tests we have learned collapse into a single question you can ask of anything you pick up. The melons and the pineapple and the strawberry sit on one side of it. The avocado sits on the other. And the question that divides them is the one that turns all of this scattered knowledge into a single skill. The question we turn to now, because it is the master key the whole journey was quietly cutting all along. By now, a pattern has surfaced beneath all 6 fruits, and it is worth naming directly, because it is the real answer to the question the whole journey began with. Why does so much of the fruit in a modern store disappoint, when the signals of good fruit are still there to be read? The answer is not that fruit has gotten worse, exactly, and it is not that anyone set out to sell you something poor. The answer is structural, and it runs through every bin in the aisle. A modern supermarket is the end point of a supply chain built to move fruit enormous distances and hold it for sale across many days. Every link in that chain selects for the same handful of qualities. The fruit must be firm enough to survive stacking, sorting, and travel without bruising. It must hold up on the shelf long enough to be sold before it spoils. And it must look appealing in an open bin, which means it must be uniform, evenly colored, unblemished, and ideally large, because that is what catches the eye and moves the inventory. Those qualities, durability, shelf life, uniformity, and visual appeal, are what the chain is paid to deliver. Sweetness is not on that list because sweetness is invisible until the fruit is cut open, long after the sale is made. This is why the fruit is so often picked before it is ripe. A fruit harvested early is firmer, ships better, and lasts longer, and for the climacteric fruits that finish at home, early picking works well enough. But for the larger group that never sweetens after harvest, the melons, the pineapple, the citrus, the strawberry, early picking is a quiet disaster, locking in a fruit that can never improve. And it is why so many fruits have been bred, over decades, toward size and shipping strength and shelf life, sometimes at the direct expense of the flavor that made them worth eating. The giant, glossy, rock-firm strawberry that tastes of cold water is not an accident. It is the visible result of selecting, generation after generation, for the truck rather than the tongue. None of this requires a villain, and it is important to be clear about that. No one is hiding the field spot or dyeing away the perfume on purpose to deceive you. The system simply optimizes for what it can measure and sell quickly, And the things it measures, size, color, firmness, uniformity, are not the things that tell you a fruit is sweet. The reading skill faded for the same reason. For centuries, every market demanded it, because the buyer and the grower spoke the same language, and the fruit arrived whole and recent, vine and belly and scent intact. When the supermarket replaced the counter and the cold chain replaced the local field, the fruit began arriving trimmed and stacked and sorted by appearance, and the market no longer rewarded the person who could read it. A skill that is no longer rewarded is no longer passed down, and within a generation or two an entire culture forgot a literacy it had held for centuries. The cost of that forgetting shows up at the kitchen table, and then in the bin beneath it. A great deal of the fruit bought in this country is never eaten. It is carried home, found wanting, and thrown away. By some measures, close to a third of all the food produced is wasted somewhere between the field and the plate, and a meaningful share of that is fresh produce that disappointed. Every sour orange composted, every watery melon fed to no one, every box of beautiful tasteless strawberries softening in the back of the refrigerator is money spent and food lost, repeated quietly in millions of kitchens every week. The disappointment that feels personal and small is, in aggregate, an enormous and invisible waste, and almost all of it traces back to the same lost skill, the inability to tell, before buying, which fruit finished and which did not. But the signals never left. That is the part worth holding on to as this story turns toward its close. The system changed what it rewards, and the teaching faded for lack of demand. But the field spot still forms on every watermelon exactly as it always has. The vine still releases a ripe melon in full slip. The pineapple still carries its sugars in the perfume at its base. The orange still hides its truth in its weight, rather than its color. The strawberry still announces itself by scent. The avocado still tells you, through its skin, which day it is on. Everything the old buyers read is still written on the fruit in front of you. All that was ever lost was the reading. And the reading is the one part of this that no supply chain can take away, because it costs nothing, belongs to no one, and can be relearned by anyone willing to slow down at the bin. Across 6 fruits we have learned what feels like dozens of separate tests, and it would be easy to leave this journey carrying a head full of particular rules. The buttery belly of the melon, the full slip of the cantaloupe, the base perfume of the pineapple, the heft of the orange, the fragrance of the strawberry, the gentle give of the avocado. But beneath all of them lie just 3 things you can read on almost any fruit in any store, and once you see them, the particular rules become simply the local accent of a single language. The first is the record of ripening, the mark the fruit kept of how it grew and how it left the plant. On a watermelon it is the field spot and the dried vine. On a cantaloupe it is the netting and the clean cupped scar. On a strawberry it is the full red to the shoulders. On every fruit, somewhere, there is a sign of whether it finished and how it parted from the plant, and learning to find it is the first habit. The second is density, the weight in the hand, compared against another of the same size, the simple physics that heavier for its size means denser with juice and sugar. It held for the melons, the pineapple, and the citrus, and it cost nothing but a moment and a second fruit to compare against. The third is aroma, the scent at the blossom end, the base, the cap, the stem. A ripe fruit announces its sugars through smell, and the absence of that smell is one of the most honest warnings a fruit can give. Record, density, aroma, 3 readings that travel everywhere. But there is one question that sits above even these 3, the master key the whole journey was quietly cutting, and it is the single most useful thing you can carry out of this story. Before you read any fruit, ask, does this fruit improve after it is picked, or not? Everything follows from the answer. If the fruit does not improve after harvest, the watermelon, the cantaloupe, the pineapple, the orange, the strawberry, and most of what fills the produce aisle, then it must be bought ripe, because the reading you do in the store is the only reading there will ever be. For these fruits, you choose the one that is ready now, and you trust the record, the weight, and the smell to tell you so. If the fruit does improve after harvest, the avocado, the banana, the pear, the peach, then you do the opposite. You buy it firm and unready. You choose by where it sits on its arc rather than whether it is ripe, and you let it finish at home on the timeline you need. That single question sorts the entire store. It tells you, the moment you pick anything up, whether you are catching a fruit at its peak or scheduling its peak for later, and it turns the scattered folklore of generations into one clean decision you can make in front of any bin. The old buyers who walked a pile of melons and chose without hesitation were not carrying a longer list of rules than we are. They were carrying a shorter one, worn down by use into instinct. Read the record, weigh it in the hand, bring it to the nose, and know which kind of fruit you are holding. Everything else is detail. The detail is worth knowing, and we have spent 2 hours on it for good reason. But the skill underneath it is small enough to carry in a sentence, and durable enough to last the rest of your life. Return now to where this began. The bin near the front of the store, piled high with fruit that all looks the same. 200 melons or oranges or pineapples under the same light, wearing the same color, sorted to the same size. At the start of this journey, that bin was a wall of pure chance. And the only honest thing to do in front of it was to choose something and hope. It does not look that way anymore, because you know now what you are looking at. You know the watermelon turned belly down is hiding the one mark that tells you whether it ripened. You know the cantaloupe carries the vine's own decision in the scar at its stem. You know the pineapple has already finished its story and is only waiting to be read correctly. You know the orange's bright color is the least of what it has to say, and the strawberry's size is no measure of its sweetness. And the hard green avocado is not a failure, but a fruit asking only for a few days of patience. The bin did not change. The fruit did not change. What changed is that you can read it. That was always the secret hidden inside the disappointment. The fruit was never identical. It only looked that way to an eye that had forgotten how to see the difference. Every melon in that pile carries a different history of sun and water and pollination written plainly on its surface, and the system that stacked them there sorted only for the things that ship and sell, never for the things that tell you which one is sweet. The reading was the one part the system could not standardize because it lives in the person at the bin, not in the bin itself. So there was never any luck in it. There was only a language spoken by the sun and the vine and the bees, written onto every fruit they ever finished, and waiting, still waiting, in every store in every season, for someone who remembers how to read it. That knowledge was never destroyed, it was only set down. And the quiet possibility at the end of all this is the simplest one of all. It can be picked back up by anyone the next time they stand in front of the fruit.